Welcome everyone to Stats and Scheme with Tage and Shawn. I'm your co-host today, Tage Seth, here with my good friend Shawn Syed. We had a very upset-filled week again in week 7 here. Lots of things to talk about. Shawn, what do you want to talk about first?
Well, we had a bunch of matchups that we really liked this week. We had Ravens-Lions, we had Chiefs-Chargers, we had Eagles-Dolphins, and we record this early on Tuesday, so I don't get to watch all of the film from Monday night. But I mean, we have to talk about 49ers-Vikings really, really quick. Of course, can't dive too far into it, but what were you feeling from Vikings-49ers?
Yeah, I thought it was a fantastic Kirk Cousins game, and I thought that the Vikings had been playing well on offense this season. They were ninth in success rate entering the game, but they were 15th in EPA per play because they had some brutal turnover luck. Tom Bliss from the NFL posts a really good graphic showing your win probability added or lost from different various luck factors this season. And the Vikings were dead last in it coming into this game, and they actually still are after this game. But you saw a lot of the stuff that was holding them back, especially on offense, reverse in this game. After that early interception by Kirk Cousins, he was lights out. Jordan Addison was playing really, really well as well, filling in that gap for Justin Jefferson. And then TJ Hockenson stepped up and made some of the contested catches that you wanted to see from a tight end that is paid that type of money. So overall, great defensive performance or offensive performance from the Vikings. And, I want to hear some of the defensive stuff that the Vikings did as well.
Yeah, Brian Flores has been a lot of fun to watch through the year. Again, haven't gotten to comb through all the all 22 for this game, but they do so many funny things where I said it, I think, a while ago, but he solves his problems with aggression. So he, I think, clearly understands that they do not have the best defensive personnel in the league. And I don't think that's an insult. I don't think they would have any issue with us saying that either, but they'll drop 8, they'll blitz 6 or more people. So you're constantly, as an offense, kind of on your heels wondering, well, I see all of these defenders up on the line. Are they going to drop out? Are they going to blitz? And you can't afford to be wrong, because if you don't protect and they do blitz, then your quarterback's on their back. And leaning into those high variance plays is something that I just love, just as kind of an aggressive defensive mentality. And they'll, on the back end, it'll look like they're playing cover 0 because it's just kind of 5 defenders. It looks like they're hanging on that first down marker, but it plays out sort of differently, where it's kind of like it's matching, but there's not like a high safety over the top, and it just morphs based on if players are going underneath. And when I got to go through the Vikings Eagles film, that was just so much fun during that week, because it's not really something that is seen, I think, across the league. The Buccaneers would use kind of a not a watered down, but a different version of it. So I mean, Flores he's cooking it up. And obviously the 49ers, they didn't have Deebo Samuel that game, but I'm excited to go back, particularly to those drop 8 snaps, where you can't always run drop 8, of course, because teams that are able to run the ball on you, or it takes a certain type of personnel on the defensive end. But that'll be interesting to see. I think that both of his picks, or at least one of them, may have been drop 8 again. I'm going to have to rewatch that. But just the idea of having extra players in really every single window, where the 49ers make so many yards after the catch, of people running through windows and into open areas. If you clock it up and you have Danielle Hunter kind of crashing the edge, it was certainly a fun one for the Vikings. I think that's going to be a good one to go back to this week.
Right. It's what we talked about last week, where ideal world, if you have great defensive personnel on defense, you're going to rush 4 the majority of the time. And if you're able to get pressure with 4, that's the right way to live as a defensive coordinator. When you're someone like Brian Flores, who's taking over a defense that struggled for a lot of last season, the personnel is not there yet. They're still developing it in a lot of different areas. That's when you just want to throw everything that you can out on the field. And so everything that you mentioned, I thought was really impressive. The multiple times where they would put, 6, 7 defenders at the line of scrimmage, and either 6 of them would rush, or like the drop 8 stuff you were mentioning, only 3 of them would rush, like really just mixing it up, taking advantage of the 49ers, really trusting one true receiving threat in that game in Brandon Ayuk. And then Christian McCaffrey was being used more in the backfield than as a slot receiver. So the Vikings could kind of key in on that as well. So, just really good game plans from Kevin O'Connell on the offense side of the ball, and Brian Flores from the defense side of the ball, for the Vikings to pull off this upset win here, which I thought was really impressive performance from them overall as well.
Yeah, I thought that it was really fun to watch Jordan Addison in that offense. And I'm sure Justin Jefferson, even being on the sideline, was really, really happy to see him burst out like that. And even later in the game, there was a pass interference call where, I don't know if you remember, against the Lions, they ran Justin Jefferson on something similar to that, where he's kind of like looping around, and it's so hard for a defender to be able to cover that much space and that many changes of direction. So that's definitely a fun, just a fun defense to watch, even if, and offense to watch, even if things maybe haven't worked out super well for them this year. But again, going forward, they're going to have chances, I think, to compete in that division with the Lions, of course. And the Lions dropped that game to the Ravens. And, Tish, I just had so much fun watching the Ravens this week. It feels like Todd Monken, Todd Monken's going to get, he should continue to get his flowers. I think he's building on what they put on tape early in the season. And it goes through Lamar Jackson, who is playing at such a high level right now. We're so used to seeing the Ravens in those condensed sets and tight formations, which have a lot of merit, especially the way that they were running the ball. But spacing out the defense also forces the defense to decide, how are they going to allocate resources? Are you going to pack the box and play single high when now you have Zay Flowers emerging and Mark Andrews just continues to get open? Or are you going to play pass first against how well the Ravens are able to run the ball, especially when they're +1 in the count, when they have a quarterback involved in the run game so much? So they cause a lot of problems for the defense. And, Tej, I was traveling on Sunday for a friend's engagement. So I'm just kind of watching on my phone as we're boarding the plane. And pretty much like by the time I was online, before I got to sit in my seat, it was 28-0. So how was the game for you? And what did you kind of have on the Ravens offense?
I think we watched about the game in similar circumstances. I was watching on TV, but like kind of eyes over my face while I was watching it. So similar there, but in that sense. But yeah, no, I like what you mentioned with the receiving options that the Ravens have right now. It doesn't seem like they have like a true alpha wide receiver one, an AJ Brown, Jamar Chase, like Tyreek Hill type receiver that's going to eat a ton of the target share. But what I think they do have is they have 5 healthy options that they can get 50 plus yards any week. Zay Flowers can do it on one catch with his yards after catch ability. Mark Andrews has gone back to being a red zone monster like he's been. Odell Beckham has had some nice plays. Rashad Bateman as well is always kind of there and has fit into a different role now with Zay Flowers emerging. And then Nelson Aguilar, I think, has been really good for them also. So when you have those 5 options that can go off for you any week and just get you that big chunk or be your leading receiver on the week, I think it's so helpful for what Monken wants to do on offense and then what Lamar Jackson's progression is going to be as a quarterback. When you look at Lamar Jackson this season, he ranks 6th in EPA per play, despite having some games with some ugly drops from his receivers earlier in the year. These receivers look a lot better this time of the year. The timing looks down, and that's the type of stuff that happens when you bring in this many new receiving options. But what he's doing on the ground as well is very impressive. He has the highest success rate of any rusher at 57% of rushes this year. So 57% of his rushes are putting the Ravens closer to scoring, which I think is really good. And then he's also back to scrambling at a high rate at around 16% of his dropbacks, turning into scrambles. But then when you look at his passing, he is the second highest completion percentage in the league. And we've touched on this before, but to get that yards after catch in a yards after catch league right now, the pass needs to be completed. It needs to be conditional on that. And so Lamar Jackson is doing a really good job of all of that as well. Like, I think he's playing at such a high level right now, and the offense is there to support him.
Yeah, I like that the way that everything is kind of coming together. And again, I just think it's so cool to see how things kind of build on each other week after week. The Ravens run all different variations of counter. They can run counter bash, where the running back runs away from the blocking scheme. And then Lamar Jackson is reading the defensive end. And if the defensive end crashes, it becomes a handoff into space. And if the defensive end kind of expands with the running back going horizontal, Jackson can keep it and follow his pullers. They run a counter RPO, where if the defense has kind of 3 defenders over the 3 receivers, it's a run inside with better numbers. And then if the defense is down numbers to the 3 receiver side, it's just a quick throw out there to be advantageous for the offense. Then against the Lions, the Ravens add another layer to their counter RPO, where they have Zay Flowers motion, go into the flat. They run counter where Lamar Jackson is reading that defensive end. The defensive end crashes. Jackson pulls the ball out, and now a linebacker is there to replace for that play right there in front of Lamar. And then Odell Beckham Jr. is wide open in space. And then to build on it even more later on, it looked like they kind of faked a boot off of counter blocking, where Lamar looks like he's going to roll into space before changing directions. He finds an wide open running back because the defense needs to respect the counter blocking. They have to make sure Mark Andrews is covered. And then when Lamar Jackson is attacking downhill, there just feels like there's not a lot a defense can do. So the Ravens can run what seems like an entire offense off a single concept. And it's really a headache to keep track of for a defense. They just consistently, they put linebackers in so much conflict. Lamar is able to you just have to be kind of frozen sometimes as a linebacker when you're, should I guard against the run here? Am I going to expect a fake? And I really do like how they've spaced things out to give us just a different feel for it. And I mean, how many clips are we going to go through of Lamar just zipping a ball kind of an inch away from a linebacker's hand? Just a real high level performance from him and the offense as a whole.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, I definitely agree. And when Eric Eager and I looked at linebackers in our study and how they cover ground in the run game, it was often these Lamar Jackson type quarterbacks that would make the linebackers get stuck most often. So like you mentioned there, I think the data backs it up as well. And like you're also talking about, Todd Monken really found himself in this game, I think. And if we see more Todd Monken games like this, the Ravens are going to be able to compete with anyone in the league from an offensive perspective. The Ravens came into this week running a lot of 11 personnel, but they were the 25th best team out of 11 personnel. They weren't doing it that well. So I was really curious to see what they were going to do with that. And in this game, we saw them decrease the amount of 11 personnel that they used, and they started using a lot of 21 personnel, 12 personnel, and even some 22 personnel. So really just getting more personnel diverse with that. They were so good out of 21 personnel. Patrick Ricard played 13 snaps, and they had a 1.0 EPA on those snaps when he was on the field for the Ravens there, because the Lions didn't really have an answer to two backs there with Ricard, and then whether it was Justice Hill or Gus Edwards. And then even when they got into their 22 personnel, it was Keaton Mitchell who played two of those snaps, and he looked impressive on those as well. So just all of that they were able to do with those snaps, how efficient they were able to be running and passing out of different types of personnel groupings that weren't 11 personnel was really impressive from Todd Monken. And then not to mention all the stuff that you talked about with the pass concepts and the play to Odell Beckham that the Lions defense was frozen for, and all of that stuff as well.
Yeah, then you have that kind of fake quarterback sweep where Lamar looks like he's running to the outside. Mark Andrews just slips out, and bam, an easy completion. And even, I think it may have been the first drive, but it was a fourth down where they faked that inside run. They boot out. They got their left tackle in space, and Lamar's almost always going to win those situations. So it feels like where last week we were talking about, what's your Ben Johnson touchdown of the week? We're going to have to maybe keep our eyes on Todd Monken a little bit. He put out a really good one. And speaking of Ben Johnson, getting to how the Ravens defense, I mean, I feel like we always talk about it because we think so highly of Mike Macdonald, what he has done for 2 years in a row, really putting together teams where Mike Macdonald knows how to get the most out of players. Like every week, it feels like Macdonald understands offensive protections and knows how to flip the math in favor of the defense. They'll send a linebacker and drop the defensive end away, which usually ends up with a linebacker one-on-one against a running back. Against the Lions, they had a really nice pressure where they shift to a load front, which puts both defensive tackles to one side of the center. Then they send Roquan Smith and they send the nickel off the edge, who ends up as a free runner. And then they drop both of those inside defensive tackles as kind of wrap players underneath to take away some quick throws. And they force offenses to know their hots and hit those hots, or make you keep a running back in and lose the potential of having a pass catcher out on the route. And I mean, if you're getting free runners with 4 rushers, usually you're doing a pretty good job. And it's been fun, I think, to see that Ravens defense, where last year we thought Mike Macdonald is special and putting together great game plans against the Bengals, most notably, and seeing that continue over to this year has been really fun.
For sure. I definitely agree with that. And I think Mike Macdonald has done a tremendous job as defensive coordinator for the Ravens this year, because when you look at where the Ravens rank relative to other defenses and then the personnel the Ravens have compared to these other defenses, I think that's what makes it the most impressive for Macdonald. The Ravens rank second in EPA per play on defense right now, in between the Browns and the 49ers, who just had an off week there against the Vikings and the Colts respectively. But the Browns and 49ers are really talented on defense. Their GMs have prioritized that. Meanwhile, the Ravens are getting a lot of production out of like someone like Jadeveon Clowney, who, kind of showed up right before the season started and all of that stuff. So I think that's been good for them. Lions entered this game with a 15-game streak of scoring at least 20 points. Didn't even get a touchdown until garbage time. Took them until they were down 28-0 to get a first down. And then like you mentioned with Roquan Smith, like he is the quarterback of that defense. He allows them to do so much, and he's unleashed Patrick Queen behind him. Patrick Queen has the third best average depth of tackle in the league. Have to give a shout out to my friend Dresden Dale, who built a really cool website for average depth of tackle. So how deep he's getting into the backfield to tackle is what Patrick Queen has specialized in this season. And that's because Roquan Smith allows them to do so much on the back end. He covers up for so much. So when you're the Ravens and you're allowing the fifth lowest completion percentage, you're letting up the third least yards after catch when catches do happen, that's a great formula for success.
Okay, it feels like if you put me and you at defensive end for the Ravens, Mike McDonald's gonna find a way for us for us to get pressure. And yeah, I'm glad. I feel like we've talked about this a few weeks in a row now, because yeah, if you build an ideal defense, whatever you want to say, front to back, back to front, like you want to have a really, really strong defensive line, and they are playing at a high level. But yeah, they don't have a Myles Garrett, like a real person who we're going to talk about as maybe defensive player of the year every week on the front four, but they're playing at a high level. And I like that you mentioned Queen, and then the kind of interconnection that Queen and Roquan have there, because I think if you take Roquan Smith out of there, then maybe you don't get as high of a level of play from Queen, because I like that you mentioned the average depth of tackle. A lot of times McDonald's just sending Queen, and you can do that because then Roquan can cover across the formation and really cover a lot of space at a high level. And that lets you let your other linebacker just be more aggressive, where I would imagine that I think it's fair to say Roquan's probably better in pass coverage than Patrick Queen. So play to your players' strengths. And overall, I just think of the Ravens defense and what Mike McDonald's doing as just like, it's just a modern defense. Like it's taking small ideas from the college level and just advancing them kind of over and over, where you're running your creepers or sims or replacement pressures, whatever you want to call them, where you're still only blitzing 4 people. You're just wasting offensive linemen, where it looks like an offensive lineman isn't protecting anyone. And it's not the offense's fault. It's just the defensive coordinator understanding really well, these are your exact protection rules. This is how we get a linebacker one-on-one on your running back. And then they'll have fun stuff where against the Lions were in a condensed formations, and he sends both cornerbacks. I feel like that's just the heat check of, as a defensive coordinator, if you're comfortable enough to do that, you got a lot of fun things going on in that defensive meeting room. And I wonder how, Monken and McDonald together are probably a real fun conversation. 2 people that they're putting the Ravens in a really, really good situation this year.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. That's a great point to bring up, because when you go back to like someone like John Harbaugh, who's that CEO type coach, one of the best things that you can do as that type of coach is to give yourself great coordinators, and definitely has passed the test at defensive coordinator these past 2 seasons. Monken is looking really promising as well for everything that we talked about. So I think that's really exciting for the Ravens right now. And there's going to be a lot of talk about their hierarchy in the AFC with the Bills and some of the other teams that you thought would be up there kind of, faulting a little bit this week. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how the Ravens go on the rest of the year. They don't play the Chiefs, sadly, this regular season, but, hopefully we get that type of matchup soon, because I think that would be a super cool matchup to watch.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as you said, top teams in the AFC, it's hard to not talk about the Chiefs as we talk a little bit about, I think we'll do Chiefs defense first, just going from Ravens defense, because 2 defensive coordinators who it's just hard not to like them. The Chiefs, of course, they have Spags, who's a respected defensive coordinator, and their defense can win one-on-one up front with Chris Jones. They move him around. I like what they do, where Chris Jones will end up on the outside on third downs, where if he's on the inside, the center can slide to him, and that can kind of be a little bit of a double team for the offense. But when he's on the edge, then you're either forced to maybe, you're probably not going to push the guard over there. Maybe you have the guard on the inside, but you're usually going to chip or have something with a tight end or a running back if you want to help on the outside there. And that wastes one eligible receiver in the pass, and that becomes a big advantage for the defense. I think that they also are happy to play tight man coverage against you, when their offense is firing, it seems like they'll seal the game away with cover 2, but they're going to get into those brackets. We saw them against Amon-Ra St. Brown in week 1. They bought it out, I think, only once against Keenan Allen, but it's connecting that to Flores, to McDonald. It's just a more aggressive style of defense that is forcing you to, you got to fix your pass protection. Are you going to be able to beat us one-on-one in these sort of little spaces? If against the Chargers, it seemed like a lot of time, Chargers offense didn't have the worst games by any means, but down the stretch, especially when that offense is pressing you, it's hard to win against the Chiefs secondary that is just really, really good. So how'd you feel about the Chiefs defense, and what do you got there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we were texting about this a little bit, you mentioned that the Chiefs have kind of been building to this defense for the past couple of years now, and you can see it play out. The thing that's scariest about the Chiefs defense this year is this is the best defense that Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes have ever had in their era together in Kansas City. 2018, they had the 28th best defense in the league. 2019, 18th best. 2020, 19th best. 2021, 23rd best. And then last year, you saw the first above average defense for Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes to have together. It was the 15th best in the league. They played really well down the stretch. Now they have the 6th best defense in defensive EPA per play. So now you're looking at a defense that can play at a top 10 level paired with the offense that usually plays at the top 3 level. And that's what I think is really scary for the rest of the league this season. I think that just everything that the Chiefs can do right now on defense, like you mentioned with the secondary, and then what else they're getting out of the defensive line between Chris Jones and Michael Dannon and George Karlaftis, and the rate at pressures and sacks that they're able to get this year. I mean, Chris Jones is 5.5 sacks, missing the first game, and kind of getting back into the groove of things in the second game. Like, I think that's been really good for him this year as well. And like all of them together paired with a secondary that's playing really well between Justin Reed and L'Jarius Sneed and Trent McDuffie and those players is making me really excited about the Chiefs defense this year. Not to mention what you were talking about with how Spags is scheming them up and how we usually see Spags lock in later in the year. Like, he already seems to have done that with this defense.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he decided, all right, we're gonna start early this year. We'll let the offense kind of figure their stuff out and play backwards. But Spags is known for those kind of big rotations and those trap blitzes, and they didn't have to do it a lot against the Chargers. Of course, I think that's something that we will see, especially when it comes playoff time and everything. And I think you had a funny tweet where it's like, week 1, you say the Chiefs are the best team. And then weeks 2 through 6, you're like, oh, this team. And then week 7, you wake up and again, you're like, the Chiefs are probably the best team. And I like that the defense is doing so well, where as we get to talking about the offense a little bit, the offense, I think, has a bit to go, but it's a lot easier when you have Patrick Mahomes, who I'm probably going to be telling my nephews that that's the best quarterback of their lifetime, that he is always playing at a high level. And I think the Chiefs offense is probably so unbelievably infuriating to go up against. The Mahomes to Kelce connection is so good. And I actually don't think a lot of players would get away with what Kelce does within the structure of offenses, because there's so many times where it seems like Kelce's freelancing a bit or is allowed to find space against zone coverage. And I just think some coaches would prefer the receiver run the exact route as called. So that to me is a credit for Andy Reid, where we've seen this over a few years now with Kelce and Mahomes, of course, that he understood early that these two are special together. And, it's easier to allow a freestyle when the freestyle is ending up in a touchdown. And then when the Chargers get into man coverage, then Mahomes is able to, he's able to rush and find space. And I just can't think of an offense that I would more like to have when it's 3rd and 18 and it feels like it's almost automatic for the quarterback to find some way to pick it up. So how are you feeling about the Chiefs offense, and what do you got on that end?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what you mentioned with Kelce there really sums it up. Kelce was not leading the tight ends and receiving yards for the first couple of weeks of the season. Now he's basically just lapping everyone. He sits at 525 receiving yards with TJ Hawkinson, Darren Waller, and Sam Laporta all right below 400. So Kelce's more than 100 yards ahead of everyone there. He is an 80% catch percentage when targeted by Patrick Mahomes on passes that don't get tipped or are thrown away, which I think is insane. And then a 37.2 total EPA when targeted, which is 14 more than George Kittle in second place. So Travis Kelce is back to playing tight end at a very, very high level, as we expected coming into this season as well. And we know he had the injury that gave him the slow start. But yeah, I mean, the Chiefs offense was really good in this game out of 12 personnel when they were having Kelce and a second tight end out on the field. And I think that was really impressive. And they passed 67% of the time out of 12 personnel, which is above league average, because they knew that they could take advantage of the Chargers defense. And everything just looked so clean for the Chiefs in this game, especially in the first half. They were getting clean pockets. They weren't getting pressure that often. Kelce was doing really well. You had an MVS long touchdown. You had Rashee Rice looking like, another late round find for the Chiefs at wide receiver. And as long as they have Kelce and they can have that connection where he's going to get about 100 yards in a game, they can build the rest of the receiving yards up from around like this just assortment of wide receivers, where different types of receivers will have different games depending on the defense that they're playing. And I think Andy Reid's going to have a lot of fun and thinking about like which receivers he wants to scheme open and in which situations, depending on the looks that they're getting and everything like that. So as long as they have those three core pieces together, Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, you're almost always going to be looking at a top 5 offense.
And that receiver room is pretty interesting because it is, of course, it's a younger receiving room and your best receiver is a tight end in Travis Kelce, but it's more important to the Chiefs that their receivers kind of are coming into their own in week 17 as opposed to week 7. So they have the ability to kind of get that runway where they can figure out things. And by, you've banked 17 weeks of game reps as you get to week 17, week 18 and get into the playoffs, then that's going to could look like a different offense where you have now figured out, well, this player, is in this role. And be interesting. Of course, they get Mecole Hardman back for, whatever he's able to produce. I thought it was fun to see just MVS just extending plays and having a good connection with Kelce there. So you may not think, they're the best receivers in the NFL. And I thought we got to transition. We got to get to the Eagles defense. I'm so excited to talk about this one because that's similar to the Chiefs receivers where the defensive back room the Eagles were like on their 5th and 6th safeties. They're signing guys off the streets to play against the best offense in the league that we just will continue to talk about because I think they're special. But the Eagles defense did a few things that I thought, it made me super encouraged by Shawn Desai. I'm encouraged by him week to week. I think it's one of those performances where it feels like, if he's just a defensive coordinator for the rest of his life, he's able to do it because of a performance like this. I obviously hope he gets a head coaching job offer, whether it's this year or next year. I thought the Eagles, they won up front early. They shut down the Dolphins' explosive run game that we're so used to. They forced the Dolphins into predictable passing situations. And it seemed like they were playing a lot of cover 2, just like the Bills did. And it just seemed like they were it's as if they saw like Tua's heat map and they knew, okay, he throws the ball this many yards off the hashes. We need to make sure that we muddy up that area. And it was really, really fun to watch over and over. And you have different variations of cover 2 where there's Tampa 2 where it seems like a middle linebacker is just running straight down the field, and then you have kind of a more I just call it regular cover 2 where that player they're relating to the third receiver instead of really bailing out of that space. And I thought the Eagles did a good job being aggressive with their cornerbacks in cover 2, try and squeeze the windows just as much as you can. And then when it got to some situations where the Dolphins designed some plays that were specifically meant to beat that, the defensive line is able to cause a little bit of issues. We'll talk about kind of or if it's a replicable plan, seeing that the Bills and Eagles kind of went back and forth on that. But Tej, what do you think of our guy Shawn Desai and the Eagles defense against the Dolphins?
Mm-hmm. I really like the point that you brought up, forcing the Dolphins into obvious passing situations. What's really interesting about the Dolphins passing efficiency this year, or their kind of the performance on early downs versus late downs, is they do have the best early down EPA per play from a passing perspective in this season, but they are actually below average when it comes to late down EPA. So that's been something interesting to monitor. I think when you are sitting at early downs and you're Mike McDaniel, and you can do so much with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and then also like what you can do in the run game with kind of the motions and different stuff like that. But then when you have to go into traditional drop back passing game, I think that muddies the waters a little bit for the Dolphins offense. And that's why we've seen a below average performance on late downs, which is really the only thing that the offense is below average in this season as well. And then, yeah, like I was most impressed by the way that the Eagles handled the most explosive run game in the league coming into this game. I thought that you're always going to give up an explosive to Tyreek Hill unless you truly dedicate half of your defense to taking them away. And, that was fine for the Eagles to give up that touchdown. But, when it came to taking away the run game, like the Dolphins were not able to get anything on the ground as well. I thought that the Eagles were playing really disciplined football on that side of the ball. Jalen Carter continues to be an amazing defensive tackle in his rookie year, and I think that's helping them so much. And then when you put him next to Jordan Davis and everything that they can do, Hassan Reddick as well, making some big plays in this game. Like Dolphins had a decent amount of offensive line injuries coming into this game, and then had some more as the game went on. And the Eagles defensive line is almost always going to have the advantage, but especially against an injured offensive line. And they were able to take advantage of that for sure.
Yeah, the run game was interesting because I think McDaniel early on wanted to get into some sort of outside zone schemes with a little bit of toss action, get that ball a little bit closer to the edge. And then, yeah, as you said, Hassan Reddick just played out of his mind on those early snaps where even if a tight end was kind of blocking down on him, he's able to resist that pressure and stop that. And then McDaniel went into a few more runs inside where Jordan Davis was playing really, really well. I do think late in the game, maybe not too late at that point, but they were able to get into more of those kind of sweep and reverse actions where, you're just not going to be able to stop them when they're that far on the edge. So that may be something that Miami, maybe next time, if they play again, they want to get to that a little bit earlier in the game. And then I do think the Eagles did just an awesome job of limiting yards after the catch. And you could say part of that is structural in the way they had cover two. So there's just kind of more people there after the catch because, Tyreek Hill did have some catches. I just don't think that you're like, okay, we say the Eagles did a great job stopping the run. They played aggressive cover two and they limited yards after the catch. Can you replicate those three things? No, like I don't think that every single team can do that because every single team doesn't have the defensive interior that the Eagles have. Every single team can't play cover two with the same amount of aggression that the Bills play. And then I don't know. I mean, it's a game of blocking and tackling. The Eagles just did an awesome job tackling. And then even then there were a few bounces here and there where, Tyreek Hill has what kind of looks like a touchdown. It ends up just in a weird spot. It ends up bouncing off his knee after he's trying to bring it in. Had some, I'm not an official in the NFL, whatever you want to think about the penalty calls this way or the other. But I do think when you look at how the Bills played him, how you look on the way the Eagles played him, it's like if we were creating our NCAA 14 team, that, well, you got to win up front. You got to have DBs that can tackle, but it's so much easier said than done. So I do think it'll be interesting to see, well, what does Mike McDaniel lean into as more teams continue to play that style of defense? And I just think we're going to see situations where defenses have the exact same game plan, but they don't have the same players up front. And then, you miss a tackle, Tyreek Hill is gone.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. And I think like the encouraging thing for Dolphins fans coming out of this game is this offensive performance didn't feel like the offensive performances against like the 49ers and similar ones like that last year where like Tua looked off himself and like wasn't able to make a ton of throws down the field because of like the timing getting disruptive. Tua, I thought actually played pretty well in this game, all things considered. And it was more of just the Eagles defense making plays and not the Dolphins offense giving up opportunities other than that drop that you mentioned there. Like, I didn't think that anyone in the Dolphins offense from a skill position or quarterback standpoint were particularly bad. It was more of the offensive line. So I think that's why, like, going forward, Dolphins are going to play some really interesting games coming up here, especially that Chiefs one in Germany that we'll preview in a couple of weeks. And like, that's where we're going to start to really learn about this team when they can start playing these types of matches. But, at the end of the day, I think it was just like really good defensive game plan from Shawn Desai, and then the Eagles having a very deep defensive line and that being able to take advantage of Miami's offensive line.
Yeah, I think I agree with that across the board. If you replay the game 10 times, I don't think that it's like the Eagles aren't winning 7 or 8 of those games in my mind. There were certain things that were left on the table for the Dolphins that I think that they're going to be able to hammer out as we watch them on HBO Max when they're in the Hard Knocks in season. I think that's going to be a lot of fun just getting behind the scenes there. And then on the opposite side of the ball, we'll talk about the Eagles offense a little bit, because going into the game, I felt fairly comfortable that the Eagles were going to have a lot of run success on the Dolphins, because when you think back to week 1 against the Chargers, it seems like, the Chargers will be able to get whatever they want on the ground. But I thought the Dolphins interior played just awesome. The linebackers were playing so fast downhill. Fangio was building the different fronts, and between Wilkins and Long in the run game, it was just largely taken care of. But the Eagles have AJ Brown. It was such a big AJ Brown game for the Eagles. I like watching Brown because he just morphs the Eagles offense. They run a pretty simple concept that the Shanahan tree calls crash, where the outside receiver kind of runs a 5 and in, and then the inside receiver runs sort of like a rounded deep out, kind of like 10 to 12 yards. And Brown will be on that 5 and in. He has a great feel with Jalen Hurts as to when he should sit down, when he needs to run through it. And then he's able to catch the ball and just run through arm tackles for a touchdown. So they ran that concept on his one touchdown that he had. And it's just a simple thing where you run that concept again, then Hurts scrambles, and AJ Brown is able to stay alive. He's able to continue down the field, make a great catch when he has that connection with his quarterback. And there was an awesome clip where they ran a double move twice, where the defense the first time did a good job covering it. The second time, he was able to get inside a little bit. He did an awesome job tracking that ball. He's kind of like tripping over his feet as he catches it. And it's just like, wow. I mean, what can't AJ Brown do? And it made me want to ask you, like, deep throw accuracy. Do you consider it largely a wide receiver stat? Do you think it's probably right mix of quarterback and receiver, but if you were to just choose one, who are you giving more credit on those in a vacuum, the quarterback or the receiver?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like you said, it as most things are in football and in sports in general, like, it is a mix of quarterback and receiver, but I do give it slightly more to the quarterback, because I think that the receiver can do a lot of things to get open downfield. But when it comes to the catch point specifically, the quarterback does need to put it in the area for the receiver to catch it. So that's why I see it as that. And then I think Robbie Greer and some other people have done studies on that and show that it's a little more stable for quarterbacks than receivers year to year when it comes to deep balls. So I think something like that and catch score can always be influenced by quarterbacks. And like, even when I talk about yards per route run, which is a stat that AJ Brown ranks 3rd in behind Tyreek Hill and Brandon Ayuk right now, like, that's also somewhat a quarterback stat as well. And like, that's the type of things that you have to adjust for when you're looking at these different statistics.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like so hard. Well, who gets the credit? For me, like, sometimes I say, well, I don't really care, right? Like, I'm not going to blame Jalen Hurts for having AJ Brown in his offense. I'm not going to blame AJ Brown for having a quarterback who throws a really good deep ball. Like, let's just all enjoy, this fun game that we have. I think you had something on AJ Brown and Tyreek Hill for yards per route run. Are they kind of close to each other?
Yeah. So Tyreek Hill, again, like, lapping the field right now in yards per route run. He sits at 4.6. Brandon Ayuk is at 3.2, and then AJ Brown is at 3.0 at yards per route run. And then our guy Nico Collins is actually in 4th there, which I think is pretty cool. Right ahead of Justin Jefferson. Yeah.
I feel like this week, like, I really missed the Texans. Like, I really wanted another week of seeing Stroud on film, seeing what D'Amico was cooking up. So I'm glad we'll be able to get that. But yeah, the AJ Brown and Tyreek Hill thing is interesting because they, of course, win in such different ways. And, Mike McDaniel has just supercharged Tyreek Hill, and AJ Brown just has so much room to work in the Eagles offense. And their offensive scheme, it's not the most complicated thing where they have probably one of the lowest motion rates in the league, because they are more than happy to say, hey, we have AJ Brown. He is probably more physical than you. He is really, really fast. He's like, there's just no one that can kind of tackle him one-on-one. So we're going to throw these short routes to him. And then when you're kind of get too antsy, you want to stop those routes, we can run our double moves against you. So AJ Brown has been a lot of fun. I thought the Eagles did a good job. They got into their screen game a little bit. Obviously for National Tight Ends Day, Dallas Goedert had a good game. One small thing, Hurts was using his cadence to kind of get the defense to express their intentions, which that's really fun, because the Fangio defense, right? They want to kind of hold their shell for as long as possible and express they want to have their rotation happen really late. They want to make things look the same over and over. But multiple times Hurts used kind of a dummy count where they would fake the snap early. You would see how the defense would rotate. And there was one time where they checked into just kind of a quick slant to Hurts's left side. And that's, I think, a really, really high level of whoever that is, if that's a quarterback, the offensive coordinator, the head coach, whoever's kind of talking through that. That's a really smart thing to have, where I know those Fangio defenses, they spend so much time. They study and understand quarterback snap counts, because when your rotation is based on the snap, you want to obviously have it as late as possible. And Hurts, I think he put like a brace on one of his knees later on. It seemed like, whatever his injury is, you obviously want to see him healthy for as long as possible. But I mean, the Eagles they're now sitting at the top of the NFC. Awesome stretch of games that everyone listening, I'm sure we're going to continue to talk about the Eagles, because they have the Cowboys twice, they have the Chiefs, they have the Bills, they have the Niners, and those Kelly Green jerseys are pretty nice too. Tej, you got any thoughts on the Kelly Green? I know that gets a lot of hype every time.
Look good, feel good, right? Like I think it was worth half a point to the spread there, just like them coming out in the Kelly Green jerseys. Like I think about like when I was a kid and like I would stay up late on Saturday nights to watch Oregon play, and they would be wearing the coolest uniforms ever. And like I think just wearing those uniforms would contribute to them a little bit, just like flying down the field with all that speed that those Chip Kelly teams had there. But one thing I want to mention with the Eagles before we wrap up here is I think it's like the thing with the Eagles do, where they're able to have an automatic conversion on every 4th and 1 and even some 4th and 2s, gives them such an advantage from both the play calling standpoint and a mental aspect, where that you only have to get 8 yards in your first 3 downs, versus most teams, especially teams that are pretty conservative on 4th downs, knowing they have to get 10 yards in 3 downs. It's a big difference of when Jalen Hurts chooses to scramble, when they call designed runs to DeAndre Swift or Kenneth Gainwell on 3rd and 5 instead of passing past the sticks like other teams have to do. Like just having that cheat code in your back pocket and having a staff that's very aggressive on 4th downs is so advantageous for the Eagles, I feel like.
Did you see Kirk Cousins and the Vikings use the push sneak, and then Fred Warner jumped over the line? Yeah, like every team can't do it. Fred Warner, just an absolute pleasure to watch on a week-to-week basis. That was really cool. And I agree with you 100%. There was one time late in the game against the Dolphins where the Eagles ran it from like inside their own 30, which is just, it's so awesome to watch an offense that says, all right, well, we only need 8.5 yards. That is all we need in our first 3 downs. And it's funny, right? When you see the defense kind of make a stop on 3rd and 1 and it ends up as 4th and 1, you see all the defenders just totally celebrating, because it's hard to stop first downs in the NFL, and defenses should celebrate that. But then you see Jason Kelce just getting back to the line fast, and they do such a good job with it. They have that rugby coach that comes in from, I think he's from Sydney, where you can't have every single team do that. Mm-hmm. And I think of Jason Kelce, where whatever, I don't know where he was, if he wanted to retire, if he was thinking about it, if it at least crossed his mind. And now every single time after the push sneak, he's kind of like got like 3 people sitting on him, and then he's kind of like moseying his way up, and then he's gonna have to do it again in 3 downs. So Jason Kelce, he's just got the biggest spot in my heart every single time they run it.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. I mean, you have to give props to him for doing that. And like I jokingly tweeted, I was like, oh, like what if the Eagles just ran that play every play down the field? Like I bet they could get 3 yards per play and it would just keep working out. And like the first reply was from an Eagles reporter, and he's like, I think Jason Kelce would say some things to Nick Sirianni about that. I was like, I'm joking here, but like I agree. Like I think even the rate that they run it at like is a lot on Jason Kelce, and like that's not every play, obviously. So him and that Eagles offensive line. And then when you have Jalen Hurts able to, guy that's able to squat 650 pounds, like they make it look so easy. And then you go and you see other teams do it, like Kirk Cousins doing it. And it just looks so much more difficult. Like it's something that you can't really replicate unless you have the right pieces in place to do it, which I think makes it very impressive. And then like, it just keeps churning out extra first downs for them, which is so nice. And then like, even like from a fantasy football perspective, like having Jalen Hurts on your team and knowing he's going to get at least one rushing touchdown a game just from that play is huge as well. So benefits everyone except for opposing NFL defenses. Definitely a play that has been fun to follow, and we'll see, what if there's going to be more Fred Warners that are able to time the snap and jump over the line of scrimmage. That would be fun to see Fred Warner against the Eagles offensive line, and to see like what would end up happening on the tush push there.
I mean, hey, we're probably going to see that when the Eagles play the Niners again. Obviously, a game with, it seems like there's something a little personal in that. Tage, before we head out, why don't you, I know you put out some fun stuff about some updates to our website at sumersports.com. A lot of good free data there. Of course, I'm a film guy, but it helps me a lot, I think, confirming what my eyes are seeing, whether it feels like an offense is really explosive or not. Tage, you got anything, just maybe some of the filters you added, or give a little plug for ourselves, so Eric can be happy. He can send us the fun messages about the website cooking.
Yeah, so if you go to sumersports.com, we have team and player stats that we've had the entire season, but we were just able to push some updates thanks to the help of some really hardworking people here, where you can filter tables not only based on season going back to 2020 or based on different like game situation, like non-garbage time and fourth quarter and stuff, but you can also go to the personnel tendency page, the formation tendency page, and you can just look at how all offenses perform out of 11 personnel, or you can look at your favorite teams or your division. Like, we have that multi-select option now available on the site for you to look at different stuff like that. So, if you're on the site and you want to see how the Dallas Cowboys are doing, for example, you can click on just their filter, look at the Cowboys. You can see that they run 11 personnel the majority of the time, 12 personnel 16% of the time, what EPA they're getting out of those personnels. All of that stuff is available for you, and you can do that on the defensive side as well to see how they're faring against that. And then on the players tab, we have a minimum plays slider now. So instead of seeing the top 36 quarterbacks in terms of plays in the league, you can take out Andy Dalton and PJ Walker and Anthony Richardson, like those types of quarterbacks that aren't going to play the full season if you like, and just look at starting quarterbacks. You can look at just quarterbacks that have the top 20 amount of plays. Like, we have that slider available for each position as well.
Yeah, I think it's a great site. It's free. It's available. Take some time, look at it. There's some fun stuff with kind of team strengths, with rest of the way schedules. And I just think it makes watching on Sundays a little bit more fun. We appreciate everyone listening to another episode of Stats and Scheme. Please keep that feedback coming. We love getting the DMs, whether it's good or bad. Tell us what we need to work on, whether we need me to talk a little slower, or Tage to get a clearer mic. We'll get there when we get there. But keep listening. Make sure Eric do a really good job Mondays and Wednesdays. Take a look at our site. As we just said, those team tables are pretty fun. Those filters are going to be cool. Excited to see what people dig up there. So we will see you all next week for a Halloween episode of Stats and Scheme.